over 90% of workers were willing to give up 23% of their lifetime income for a job where they felt that their work mattered.
Even before you start, collecting the data, it's about leadership support with this.
And the actual tangible cost of lost productivity. And the most recent number I heard was from Gallup, and it was $8.8 trillion problem, right? The disengagement problem.
Hello, my name is César, and I'm the founder and managing director of Dharma Center for Wellbeing, and I would like to welcome you to Re-Engaged at Work, a podcast designed with you in mind to help you improve engagement, retention, and performance through workplace well-being. Now, before we start this episode, make sure to click on the subscribe button below so you can be the first to benefit from the wisdom, knowledge, and experience of our distinguished guests. And speaking of distinguished guests, on today's episode, we've got the wonderful Kacy Fleming. So, Kacy, can you say hi to our viewers and listeners?
Of course. Hi, everybody. And thanks so much for having me here, César.
All right. So Kacy is an organizational psychologist. She is the head of well-being globally for Takeda, one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world. And she's a TEDx speaker as well. And I don't know if you know this, but Kacy has authored pieces on midlife career transitions, menopause, as well as series on flexible work as well. And by the way, Kacy, there are changes in the law around flexible working in the UK that we'll talk about in a moment as well. But let me finish introducing you. Last October, Kacy shared her thesis on factors that affect productivity in flexible work environments at the New England Psychological Association annual conference. And as some of you know as well, Kacy has featured in media like HR Grapevine, Success Magazine, the Wellbeing Designer podcast, and Rebels with a Heart. And when Kacy is not busy improving the work and life experience of workers around the world, she is an avid fiction reader, a downhill skier, we're going to talk about that later on as well, and a seasoned yogi who enjoys watching mysteries with her partner Mark and dogs Otto and Finn. Did I get all of that right then, Kacy? Am I missing something?
That is a lot. And that every time I hear the things, especially the psychology thing, because that's a recent master's, it doesn't even feel like me. But yes, you got it correct. And thank you.
All right, Kacy. So, Kacy, I've known you for a while, in your capacity of head of global wellbeing for Takeda, and we've worked together. And by the way, thank you for, the wonderful work that you do. I mean, I've had the pleasure to be of service to you in Zurich, in Boston, and globally as well through the online work that we've done. And I've seen you, at work, and I've seen you exercise that wonderful brain of yours and the wonderful experience that you've had. And when we were thinking about launching this podcast, as you know, our consultancy at Dharma Center for Wellbeing centers around providing, best-in-class workplace wellbeing consultancy. And there are very few people that do what we actually do around the world, and you're one of them. You're like a rare species. And I said to myself, if I am going to bring someone, to the podcast that really knows about how to craft a strategic, comprehensive, and systematic approach to workplace well-being, I mean, it's like you're perfect for this, So that's why, as soon as we had the idea for the podcast, I said, I know who the first person that I'm going to contact in this particular subject or in this particular area of expertise, and that is my dear Kacy Fleming. So thank you so much, Kacy, for taking part of this episode.
Oh, thank you for having me here. And we have done some really great work. And that's one of the exciting challenges of doing this work globally, is that it is not the same everywhere. It is so different. And so I've loved the opportunity to work with you and so many other experts in the space and just learn every time we're together.
Fantastic, Kacy. So let me start by at least giving you my impression of what I see, in the world today. And in the world, I see leaders that don't really give a shit about their people, excuse my Portuguese, and they see their people as expendable, and they see them as a means to an end. And sometimes they're frank about it, and they say, "Yeah, sure, that's the way I operate, that's the way I roll, and I don't care. I'm making money, and that's all I care about." So at least they're sincere. The ones that I'm really concerned about are the ones that say that they, our people are our greatest asset. and they frankly don't give a shit either, and but there's a big segment of, or a big chunk of leaders that I call them the well-meaning leaders. They mean well, and they basically train some of their employees to be mental health first aiders. They have an employee assistance, program, and they do the fruit baskets and the yoga classes and the health fairs and the mindfulness day, and they do a bunch of stuff, and so and when I look at what they do is they have a massive plan of sporadic well-being interventions, right? But is there a strategy behind it? Is there some kind of overarching, framework and structure that they're trying to follow, and there's a lot of those, who mean well, but they are not really even complying with their legal duty of care. They're not complying with international standards, but they're deluding themselves, by thinking that by doing all of this activity, I'm doing great, right? So, and we'll talk about that. So from your point of view, how would you actually even define, workplace well-being to start with? So let's, people that know me, I'm a definition nut. So let's start there. How would you actually define workplace well-being, Kacy?
Yeah, and that's such an interesting question because it has changed dramatically, even in, the short time I've been in this space, right? Like I started working in corporate well-being 8 years ago. And between then and today, when I'm in a full-time role and a full capacity doing this work, we've gone from a lot of those things that you mentioned before, right? These programmatic options, things like yoga, things like fruit baskets, things like exercise, mental health, social well-being, all of these things, which are all important, right? I don't want to take anything away from that, to really understanding what drives worker well-being. And so much of that has to do with the culture of the organization, right? You hit on a lot of those things. So much of it has to do with workload, purpose and mattering in job, right? Do you feel connected to the work you're doing? Do you understand the through line between what you're doing at your job and, what the company is trying to do? And I think there was a brilliant study out of, Better Up Labs that talked about the fact that over 90% of workers were willing to give up 23% of their lifetime income for a job where they felt that their work mattered. And that really struck me. And so when I think about the definition of well-being today, sitting in this seat and kind of as we see it, it is not those wonderful things of emotional, social, financial, and physical well-being. But you can eat all the broccoli and kale you want. You can work out, 7 hours a day and train for marathons. But if you don't have loving family, community, a safe workplace, purpose, you won't be well. And so I think we have to look at it definitionally from two angles, right? Especially in an employee-employer contract. There is that self-care component, and I hate the word, but there is that component of accountability for your own well-being, right? Asking for what you need, blocking and tackling your calendar, all those things. And then, as I always say, well-being is not a solo sport. There's that community side of it. And that's really where the employer comes in to make sure that leaders are role modeling behaviors that create well culture, that leaders are creating permission for employees to take rest and disconnect. And so to me, well-being is this giant manifestation of all of these components in your life that make you a full human, and that make you or enable you. I don't want to say make, that enable you to perform at a peak level when they're in place. And when they're not, you will be ill, you won't be able to complete your work well. So it's not, I can't give you like a 6-word definition. It's not that to me. And I think that's where we get into trouble, is when we try to make it a 6-word definition. I think it is, if workers are well, they feel their best, they perform their best, and they're engaged. And that takes a lot of work, both employer and employee.
You mentioned the aspect of self-care, right? And the way we see workplace well-being in a nutshell is about creating an environment in which the company actively helps its employees to strengthen their personal resources, and thrive in their roles and flourish in their roles, right? Um, and so the element of self-care is embedded into that, because as a company, you can provide your people with the tools, the knowledge, the information, and the resources. But at the end of the day, they are the ones that have to consume that information and translate it into behaviors that will actually be conducive, to them experiencing high levels of physical, mental, or emotional well-being. So there's an element of responsibility with the individual. And as you know, I'm based in England, right? And most leaders that I speak here about, well-being, they say to me, I don't like to tell people what to do when it comes to, that's why I don't, and they're getting the wrong idea. It's like, you are not telling people, for instance, with financial well-being, you're not telling people how to invest, or you're not telling people how to manage, their debt consolidation or whatever. You're just, as a company, you're just giving them access to resources, so that they can make better decisions for themselves. So that the self-care component that you mentioned, it cannot be taken out of the equation. The employee has to have some skin in the game, right? Now, Kacy, obviously, you work at a massive company, right? But I think that the principles, still apply, whether you are basically managing a business of 20 people or whether you are managing a business of thousands of people. There's certain principles that apply when it comes to coming up with, again, a strategic, comprehensive, and systematic approach to workplace well-being. So where do we start in a process like this? And again, the principles apply to however big or however small the company is, right?
Yeah, and I'm pretty biased on this one because of my background in organizational psychology. I'm going to say you start with the data and hopefully you have it. And you know what? You may not. If you're a smaller company and you're just getting started, with well-being for your organization, there are people that can help, right? There are consultancies out there that can help, and they can come in and obviously, do surveys, do focus groups, do that sort of thing to get the data. But I think, I'll speak from really my current experience, which is having the data. And really looking not just at the quantitative data. The story's always in the comments, right? It's always in the qualitative data. And seeing what your people tell you. What I've learned from focusing on that exclusively at the center and then asking more questions when I don't have an answer, right, for something I'm seeing or something I think I'm recognizing in the data, is that I'm not making gut assumptions. I'm not making assumptions that are right for a white woman sitting in the US, right? I am looking at data for the entire employee population. They've all had the opportunity. And so that allows me to make much more guided decisions. And from there, once I've kind of seen what the data tells me, my next kind of step is to look at, well, what resources does the company have, and how available or accessible are those resources to the various populations or different work settings that people have. And from there, it's about bringing in anything we're missing, right? Or if we have the right resources to partner with, finding a way to partner with them to kind of create materials that fill any gaps that we have. But the really critical part when it comes to strategy is this cannot live, this well-being thing, right? It's not a silo. It's not like, oh, we have a head of well-being, it's her job. She pushes well-being out to the organization and everybody just, does what is said. It has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with where you get the support throughout the rest of the organization. And that is probably the hardest and the longest part of well-being strategy. That's the long game, is really making sure that your leaders understand that this isn't a soloed or siloed activity, that this isn't, something or a resource that they can just give to their people, right? Like, apps are great, but they don't fix the problem, right? An app is not a strategy, an app's an app. And if we're not teaching people how to use that app, or also ourselves using that app, then if I have very little hours in my day, and my leader is not doing that. Well, why am I going to do that? I'm going to feel like, no, I'm not going to get ahead if I use the app. I'm going to get ahead if I do exactly what they do. Right. So strategy becomes about leadership development, about leadership behaviors, about role modeling. And that's one of the really incredible things that I've gotten to see in my tenure with my current organization is we didn't start from scratch. There was a study that had been done. There were some apps that were in place. Somebody did a really good job kind of getting everything started, but we have built it and we have embedded it. And no, we're nowhere near done, right? There's a lot more work to be done, but we've systematically kind of moved through those steps. And that is starting that transformation process of creating a culture where people can learn, grow, and thrive. And that's what it's about, right? It's not about creating, you know, well-being widespread. It's about creating a high-performing culture where people can learn, grow, and thrive.
Yeah, you mentioned data, right? And I completely resonated with that for a number of reasons. Number one, as you know, I had a past in the information technology and communication sector for about 15 years. So I'm a data-driven guy, naturally, right? And it's important because obviously without data, how are you going to know what to address, right? Or what are the issues? So for smaller companies, what we do in our consultancy is we have a tool that allows us to actually extract that data and understand how are your people doing when it comes to physical well-being, mental well-being, emotional well-being, social well-being, financial well-being, etc. And that's basically what drives, basically the process, right? But I think that there's a previous step that we take, and I totally know that you're going to agree with this, is even before you start, collecting the data, is about leadership support with this, right? Because if the leadership is not fully on board, even if you collect the data, and even if you structure, by the time you actually need the support to kind of deploy this, it doesn't matter if you employ 20 people or 2,000 or 20,000, you're done, and it's like, Kacy, I cannot begin to tell you how many, times I've had conversations with HR directors that bring me up and say, hey, we've heard about you and we would like for you to help us out, with our workplace well-being stuff. And my immediate question is not, what's your budget? My immediate question is the leadership on board? And if they say, well, they've given us the budget, they say, no, I'm not talking about budget. I'm talking about, are they actually going to take an active role in making sure that this happens? Well, they're not really that. So, okay, let's stop the conversation right there because this is not going to work. Okay, so I'll gladly take your money and I'll spend 6 months, working with you, but we're going to get to a point in which we are not going to be able to move forward. And I have a reputation to uphold, so unless the leadership is, unless you have, I can talk to your leader and I can sense his commitment or her commitment, we cannot go anywhere. And these conversations take a bit of a turn sometimes because it's like, but I've got the budget. It's irrelevant, right? So, okay, so we've gotten the, leadership. So let me ask you this question then. In your experience, how important is, leadership commitment, to the initiative? And what do you expect for leaders to do, throughout the deployment of the initiative?
Yeah. So, I mean, full stop, there definitely, for any strong change management effort, whether it's well-being or learning or anything like that, right? You have to have scaffolding of commitment, right? And it's not just, your C-suite or your HR leaders or whatever. There has to be an organizational identification with the fact that there is a challenge that the organization is facing and that there is expertise that is needed and that leaders are willing to at least try to learn and to support, right? That's really where it starts. I think realistically, right, we all know not every leader or every human is going to be on board with this, even at the last day of their tenure at the company, right? I think if we don't have a true understanding of how well-being plays into performance, how well-being plays into engagement, and the actual tangible cost of lost productivity. And the most recent number I heard was from Gallup, and it was $8.8 trillion problem, right? The disengagement problem. That's a big number, right? Unless you believe that, then there will be people for whom they just want to go to work. They don't want to deal with this. This is like another thing, right? Like, and they don't see how it fits into the whole picture. So I think the really important part is to help leaders understand how well-being fits into the whole picture of productivity, of engagement, and all of those things. And that's really challenging. And it's really challenging in the space right now. And I've had this conversation with way smarter people than me, including Adam Grant, about how do we measure the ROI of well-being. And he said, and Adam, I'm quoting you, I'm not quoting me, that the ROI of well-being should be looked at like R&D. We know we need to do research and development. We know we need to do well-being, but we never can easily produce a number, right? There's, for all the R&D projects you produce, only so many will succeed, right? But that cost has to be there because that's the cost of success, and that's the cost of innovation, and that's the cost of creativity. And well-being is very similar to that. And so I think when it comes to leaders coming on board with this picture, it's really incumbent on someone in my role to have those difficult conversations and to talk about how hard this is to measure. And especially because historically, César, we don't measure well-being outcomes kind of perfectly on the back end, right? Like it's done, but it's not clean. So I can't easily look at data anywhere and say, well, this was caused by this well-being program, or that was caused by that well-being program, because it's not even that kind of a concept, right? It's an employee experience or employee engagement number, and well-being is kind of a part of that totality. So it becomes, in my opinion, a really challenging story to tell. And that doesn't mean we're going to stop trying to figure out the right way to tell that story or to understand that data. But well-being is so closely tied to engagement, performance, and all of the other things that I think when talking to leaders initially, it is that broad-based discussion.
So speaking of how to justify this and how to measure ROI, right? When I'm thinking about that, I like to talk about how actually the workplace well-being market began to take shape. So, and this goes back to the year 2008. And not many people actually connect the dots, but after I tell you the story, you'll be able to connect the dots. So in 2008, obviously we had the global financial crisis, right? And as you can imagine, Kacy, a lot of people were experiencing stress, anxiety, and they were getting depressed. And in America, particularly, as you know, in here in the UK, the health system is a national service, and in the US, it's a for-profit industry, right? So when people were actually using their health insurance because they were feeling stressed, depressed, and anxious, the insurance premiums were actually going up. And so what do you do when you're in a moment of crisis? When you're in a moment of crisis as a business, the first thing that you do is you want to reduce cost. So the bean counters started noticing that the insurance premiums were going up. And they were saying, like, how can we actually bring the health insurance premiums down? Okay, we need to invest in wellness. So because wellness refers to the physical body, and well-being, it's a much more broader concept, right? Let's invest in wellness interventions. So they started investing in making sure that their people, were healthier, and giving them, again, access to tools and resources and this and that. And guess what happened? People started feeling better. They stopped using their health insurance as much, and the insurance premiums came down. And then the bean counter said, okay, wait a second. For every dollar that I actually invested in a wellness intervention, I'm getting $8 back. And by the way, you know what I've noticed as well? I've noticed that our retention has actually improved. I've noticed that engagement has picked up a bit. I've noticed that, people are being a bit more productive. So then, boom, 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 the workplace well-being industry, got started, right? So it was thanks to the bean counters that you and I have a job in the first place, okay? But then, of course, academia then came into the picture. So they invited all the, these different universities and think tanks to start really analyzing the whole relationship between well-being and performance and well-being and productivity. And studies started to come out, the best ones, the most rigorous ones around 2011, 2012. And these studies actually keep on coming. And let me share with you a study that I'll email you after the episode today, Kacy. It's a study that was published by Oxford University in May of last year, May of 2023. And it was conducted with the help of Harvard as well. And the title of the study is Workplace Wellbeing and Firm Performance. And, these people are very rigorous in terms of, how they conduct their studies, right? And their conclusion, and I'm going to actually read this out loud. Company well-being proves to be a significant predictor of firm performance across a wide variety of indicators. We find that higher levels of well-being generally predict higher firm valuations, higher return on assets, higher gross profits, and better stock market performance. Across industries, between companies, and over time, well-being is proven to be an ever more important predictor of company performance. Organizations seeking to be successful in the new world of work would be wise to take note. And this is not the first study that has, basically stated the same thing. It's been now, 12 years of study after study after study. So usually when people ask me, so what's the relationship between well-being and performance? Academia is my friend. And say, this is the data, and then once they go through the experience themselves, and we say, hey, listen, look at your absenteeism, look at your, long-term sickness, look at your presenteeism, look at engagement, look at, what do you call it, customer feedback as well, because obviously people are happier that, they're going to be happier when they interact with clients. But as you said, it's a bit of a long game, right? Sometimes certain companies expect an immediate return to their investment. Okay, we've done this mindfulness, we've done interventions around all of the 7 areas of workplace well-being. Where's my ROI? Okay, and they're going to have to wait. As you said, they're going to have to be patient. And let me share just one more thing. There was this particular client of ours that during the initial conversations before we actually started helping them out, the CFO was very reticent. He was like, no, this is a waste of time. We should be investing in stock or marketing or stuff like that. So the leader of the business decided to she decided to let's go with it. And Kacy, I'm never going to forget this phone call. A year and a half later, after we started the workplace wellbeing consultancy, the CFO called me up and said, Cesar, I have to admit something to you. So what? Before we didn't even meet our legal duty of care. Now we meet national standards of workplace wellbeing. And now we've been communicating this not only to our employees, but to candidates that we're actually, contemplating, hiring. And I've made my calculations, and in the past, it used to take us about 13 weeks to find, or to fill a position. Now it's taking us 6 weeks to fill similar positions. But not only that, the people that are joining are actually, higher quality talent. And the reason why, and the reason behind it is because now we have a story to tell. When we're interviewing candidates, we say we meet national standards or we meet international standards of workplace well-being. And guess what? The really bright talent, that's why they're bright. Okay, you know what? You care about people, I'm going to join your organization. And so the CFO did a calculation of what actually that represented, to them as a business, and just the fact that they were able to shorten their hiring cycles and hire better talent. What it cost them to put this in place was like 2% of that.
Right.
Just looking at that tiny little kind of way of seeing things, right? So I agree with you, Kacy. It takes a little while, for business leaders to actually get it. But once they see it, once they see the results and the benefits and the impact, then there's no way that they go back to their usual ways. Wouldn't you agree?
I would. I have seen great transformation just, in not that long of amount of time with my current employer. And, when people are given the space and the safety and the trust and the autonomy to work, then what happens to them is they live into their best selves, right? I think, and I don't want to get too far off topic, but I had a leader very early in my career and probably was one of the most influential people in my life as to how I learned to see myself and my own self-efficacy, which is very deeply tied to purpose, matter, and well-being, right? And engagement. And I always say, sorry to my earliest companies, I was a really mediocre sales rep, right? I wanted to be an actor when I was younger. I was naturally good at it. I was probably a little lazy. I was definitely a little lazy and entitled. And I grew up a lot. But I had this leader, and he wasn't always sunshiny kittens, but I remember him saying to me, you will literally do, Kacy, anything you put your mind to. If you believe you can be number one, you're going to be number one. He's like, I have no doubt. I've never seen anyone more capable than you. This is all you. You just need to want it. And I remember writing down on a piece of paper, Kacy, I was Allison then, Kacy Allison, number one national sales rep. And I kept this in my car. And I won. I was number one in the world. And I don't bring this up because this is like, ooh, I'm great, right? I bring this up to say, when people think about well-being and when people think about the investment and they think about the apps and they think about all that stuff, that is all important, all of it. You have to have all of it. It's table stakes. I won't even get into the discussion of not having resources because they are table stakes, right? But I will absolutely, without a doubt, say that that is the best my well-being has ever been in my entire life, is when I had one leader believe in me, create space for me, believe that I could be more than I possibly was, give me purpose and meaning in my work, and inspire the heck out of me. And it didn't matter that I went to the bar on the weekends and had more cocktails than I'll have now. It didn't matter that, I didn't not eat gluten like I do now and all of these things. It didn't matter how I exercised. What mattered was that powerful leader had a great company with strong resources to back me up. I had purpose. My work mattered and I was engaged. I had no stress. I had no anxiety and I was able to kill it. And I truly believe that these two things have to be in place, right? We have to create cultures where leaders care. We have to create cultures where leaders understand their own importance. Our leaders are our most important workers, right? And I don't mean they're more important, but from a worker impact, that's our biggest resource, right? Like I said, you can have the greatest tools in the world, but if you have a poor relationship with your leader, your experience is totally different than somebody in another company with no resources and a leader that inspires them. And so these two things really have to go together.
As you were mentioning the importance of having a supportive, caring, inspiring leader, I remember seeing this not so long ago, that if as a leader you are, again, supportive, caring, inspiring, etc., you reduce the chances that your team members will burn out by 70%, 70, not 17, 70. So when you're talking about the increasing rate of burnout in the world, which is actually increasing, one of the most effective solutions is the one that you're proposing, is to, if anyone is listening right now that's a leader, that manages 2, 5, 20, 30 people, doesn't really matter, become that caring, supportive, and inspiring leader, and just by doing that, you'll be contributing to minimizing the work-related stress and anxiety and depression in the world, which is all associated with burnout, right? Which is so well said, Kacy. I'm just so happy that you mentioned that, because it's important for leaders to realize the influence that they have in people's well-being as well, in how they lead. Now, Kacy, so we've talked about the leadership component, right? So yes, leadership needs to be behind creating this cultural transformation of, having a strategic, comprehensive, and systematic approach to workplace well-being. We've got the data, whether you're a big company or a small company, even if you're a small company, you can still run a very specialized survey that will give you the data that you need. Based on that data, you identify the interventions that you need to put in place. A client that we had in Scotland didn't like the word intervention, so we had to the workplace well-being activities or actions anyway. But then, what international standards demand and what national standards of workplace well-being demand is worker participation. So it's not just about employees taking a very passive role and saying, okay, company XYZ, give me what you're supposed to give me, and make me better. No, it doesn't work that way. There needs to be some level, and again, international and national standards of workplace well-being do require worker participation in the deployment of these, not just in receiving and absorbing knowledge, but in actually deploying as well these initiatives, right? What has your experience been in terms of recruiting the famous, workplace well-being champions, to help kind of, deploy and not only just communicate, but literally execute and deploy all of the activities that were mapped out during the analysis phase?
Yeah, I mean, our well-being champions are everything, right? And just to kind of talk about what is a well-being champion, because there may be somebody listening that doesn't know. It's pretty literal. But they're people within the organization who have other roles and functions and not functional responsibility for well-being or for mental health, and they dedicate a certain amount of time to helping share out the programs and the resources. They amplify everything we're doing. They create initiatives that are more tailored to their populations as opposed to, the global initiatives that we put out that are intended to be for all, but maybe need some customization or localization, right? And they are so critical to really the understanding of why the apps or services or programs are important, of getting friends on board. Like, everybody would much rather get an email from their friend or their leader than me, right? Like, who wants an email from me? I don't even want my own emails. But, it means so much more when it's coming from somebody, right? Somebody that's actually tried and used it and that does not have a perceived stake in the game, right? I am sure there are people that would think that information I'm giving because I'm the head of well-being, it's easy for me to use that. It's easy for me to do this. It's easy for me to do that. It's not, but there are a lot of people that think it is, right? And so for them, having somebody that, is the head of R&D or is working in marketing or has a different kind of job than I have, not sitting in HR, using or, amplifying these programs is really critical, because it is unbiased, right? It does not carry any of the selection bias that I would have, right? About picking these resources or programs and potentially in people's minds. What I will say beyond well-being champions is, and I feel really fortunate in the conditions in which we rolled out these programs. People were hungry for solutions. And so when we selected, we really worked on things that people could tailor to their needs. Well-being is not a one-size-fits-all thing, right? Like, I personally, much to my partner's dismay, don't care about my financial well-being. This is not something that keeps me up at night in the same way that my emotional well-being does, right? And these things are all tied together, right? But I think having solutions that somebody can see as relative to them makes that huge difference. And so in addition to having well-being champions, we're really careful when we select a partner that the partners have, multilingual solutions, because we have a multilingual workforce, that they have accessibility options for our workers who work on the front line and don't have, computers to necessarily access things, that we are picking solutions that if somebody wants to work on what they're eating or focus or sleep, they can choose that. They're not stuck with kind of one thing that, we think is important. That's not to say we don't ever do like team building kind of fitness challenges, or we did this great making meeting. Like we do things, right? We do things that are company wide, but more than that, it's really making sure that the offerings we have are great offerings and that they can be customized within reason for the individuals. On top of those programs, that we have the support to help us embed organizationally. So webinars, lessons, trainings, all of that stuff. And then it's really the Wellbeing champions that amplify all of those pieces to make sure that people are actively participating. And we track, right? We obviously don't track by anything identifiable. That's not right. And we never want somebody to use something for that reason. But we want to know if the solutions are working for people, if they like it and what they like. And that also gives us data for, okay, this thing we did, well, that maybe wasn't a hit, but this thing over here really was. So we'll do more of that, right? So I think there is a really important part in this individual participation. And I will also say that, and I do push back on people when they're like, well, but somebody sent a meeting during this time and it's a no meeting day, and or somebody is asking me to join a meeting late at night. Well, that's going to happen, but you have a mouth and you can say, hey, thank you so much for inviting me to your meeting. That's amazing. I don't know if you knew, but I have a no meeting day today. Is it possible to move it? Right? Or, hey, like, I see a meeting that was set for 8 and I can make them sometimes, but that night I have a kid's basketball game that I've got to go to. Can you record it or can we move it? People are willing to do that, but this does not begin and end with leadership, right? There has a two-way contract, right? Where leaders have to create the cultural conditions and permissions for people to feel like they can take advantage of these solutions and know what they have available. And the individual has to create boundaries and hold themselves accountable to actually taking care of themselves and asking for what they need.
I love the Workplace Wellbeing Champions, especially because the people that come forward to say, I want to help spread the message and I want to help deploy these interventions, sometimes they come out of nowhere, right? In this particular client that we had, this lady wanted to be mental well-being champion. And I asked her, I'm going to say that her name is Susan. Say, Susan, why do you want to become a workplace well-being champion? By the way, how long have you been in the business? This business has been around for decades. And she said, oh, I've been in the business 3 months. You've been in the business 3 months and you've put your name forward to be mental well-being champion. This is a massive business. And yeah. Why is that? Oh, it's because I had a mental health issue in my previous job and I didn't get support when I asked for it. And so how did you feel about that? I felt floored by that. And I do not want anyone to experience what I experienced in my previous job. And that's what I want to make sure that, whatever you guys are designing when it comes to the mental well-being interventions, that I make it available to, to all of my colleagues. And then something that you said that made me think about another story as well, which is how people relate to people on the ground as well. You come as the head of global well-being, a big title, and you engage in this particular intervention, and people will, yeah, of course. But if a peer comes along and they basically pitches the same kind of intervention to them, they might see it a little different. And let me give you a perfect example of what you clearly explained. There was this particular lady who was a social well-being champion for this business. And the MD of this particular business used to host a Christmas do every year. And this lady was the, actually, no, the lady that I was telling you about was the operations director of this business. And she was the number 2 of the business, and she would never go to the Christmas do ever. And she was one of the most influential people in the business, and she would never go to the Christmas do. Okay. When we recruited Workplace Wellbeing Champions, we selected a specific person. And this person then was assigned the task of organizing the Christmas do. But she made tweaks and, she, changed the venue. She was like, on the ground. She knew what the people wanted, et cetera, right? And when they announced the date and the time and the venue, this director of operations that would never go to the Christmas do went to the MD and said, "Hey, Jeff, I want to go to the Christmas do." And he was like, "What? After like 10 years of not going, you want to go?" And by the way, and the reason why I'm telling you is because I want to pay for my partner to come. And I said, "You don't have to pay. Okay, so I'll just bring her along." Now, the really cool thing about this is not just the fact that she attended the Christmas do, is she came out, to the business at the Christmas do, just because the social well-being champion was sensitive enough to understand what kind of party or celebration it should be, the venue, and how it should be communicated and so forth. So the point you were saying, Kacy, about making sure that we've got people that can relate to other people in the business as well is absolutely massive, right? And usually what I tell champions as well, whenever they're thinking about whether to become champions or not, is, and you probably know this, the number one activity that makes human beings happy. Sometimes I ask people this question and they say to me, "Oh, it's sex, it's shopping," and anyway. I mean, they make you happy as well, but the number one activity that make you happy is making other people happy. That's undisputed. That's undeniable. And if anyone wants to leave a comment challenging this, put a comment, because I'll get in touch with you. Okay. And the thing is that once champions realize that, oh, my company is, deploying this workplace well-being initiative that will have a massive impact in the life and work experience of my colleagues, I am going to be part of the delivery vehicle of this initiative. I want to be part of this. And then, and so they're making other people happy, through the work that they do as champions. And one of the things that I've noticed as well is that people in the business start recognizing, "Oh, Kacy, you are the social well-being champion. Oh, César, you are the," and then that gives you that strengthens your sense of identity and your sense of belonging, and that community aspect that you were mentioning about, earlier today. Champions are not just a requirement for national and international standards of workplace well-being; it's common sense, right? So, okay, we've talked about leadership. We've talked about data gathering. We've talked about, obviously, designing interventions based on the data that we get from from these surveys or from these other tools that we have. We talked about the importance of recruiting champions that can help us deploy these initiatives. Now, sometimes, and I've seen this all the time, you start offering these services, apps, platforms, trainings, webinars, whatever, shape or form they take. And after you start offering this stuff, people don't show up. People don't use the app. People don't come to the trainings. People don't go to the webinars. People don't consume the information. And you're going like, what the heck? I've gone through getting the leadership support, getting the data, designing these interventions for you, and you're not using them. You're not using them. You're not showing up. What the heck? What's been your experience with that, Kacy?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think any program when it starts, regardless of what area it is in, is going to have champion, right? Self-proclaimed people that are early adopters, right? Even tech products, there's always early adopters. There are people that are totally in, they're all in, and they're coming. But I would say 80%, that's probably 20%, right? Is it the 80% out there is like, about this thing, why do I need it? Do I want to go? And that really comes down to how you communicate what's in it for those people who are looking to attend, right? Time is the most precious commodity. Time is also the most wasted commodity. I would challenge most people to say, when they tell me they don't have time, start tracking how much time you're using on your social platforms during the day. Lop half of that off, and then let me know how much time you found. I'm guilty too, right? I'm totally going to judge myself and throw myself under the bus. But, time is precious. And because we haven't yet built this kind of culture thing to be a full employee experience everywhere. And it is kind of like there's DE&I programs, there's well-being programs, there's this program, there's that. We really work to integrate those things. At my organization, we're working on that. But you're trying to grab people's attention. And so I think what's really important is that anything that you're going to do, you do it you do what is needed by the people, not by you, right? I'll give you an example. So just because I love yoga and journaling and meditation and all the things that I'm sure everybody listening would expect that I love, I don't expect that anybody else loves those things. In fact, most of the time I assume they don't like them, right? In a business setting, I may assume incorrectly, but I may see in the data that everybody throughout the organization is acknowledging a struggle to prioritize, or a struggle to rest and disconnect, or a struggle with meeting planning, or too many meetings, or not enough time. And when I'm going to do a major program, that's where I go. I don't go to something that I might like, right? I don't go to an intervention that is not related to the work that people do. I go with an intervention that is entirely related to the way that people work and also how they feel about their work. So something that has to do with time to be more productive, something that has to do with time for rest and disconnection, something that has to do with being more social with your colleagues, or how to connect, right? These are the things that bring people in, and they're still well-being offerings, right? They're still in this space. And that is how we have found the ways to get people to come to events, is to make it for them and about them, right? And not about siloed well-being. Because as I said, we can have arguments with people all day long about where we're spending our time and where we should be spending it or whatever. We're still going to do that, right? People are still going to get up and they're going to look at their phones. People are still going to go to bed and they're going to look at their phones. Not everybody, but some people, right? So it comes down to creating initiatives that are really what the business is telling you that it needs, and promoting them and making sure that all of your communication levers are pulled, right? Because people don't read anymore either. You said at the top, I love nonfiction. It's true. I do read, right? But a lot of people don't enjoy reading. They weren't either brought up doing it. It takes too much time out of their day. They enjoy television, whatever they enjoy. So you have a very short attention span to grasp. You have a very small amount of time that the population has to dedicate to something like this. It better be good. And you better put it everywhere so they know exactly where and how to access it, or it's not going to happen. So that's what I would really say has been, those are the things that have been beneficial. And it's a learning process, right? Like you have some things that are amazing and you're like, oh my gosh, I had 3,200 people attend that. And then you have some things that you think are going to be amazing and you're all excited about, and you're like, oh gosh, 150 people attended that. Like, what happened? You don't beat yourself up about it. You just make note of what resonated and what didn't. And then you ask questions like, hey, tell me what kept you from coming to this. You can't be afraid of feedback. You have to be open and want to hear the good, the bad, and the ugly, or you don't get better as a program, right? So it's really also about being like, tell me what you hated about that. Like, and just make it easy for people. Like, what was the worst thing about that program? People are like, what? And you're like, no, tell me, like, what you didn't like. So it's really taking your ego out of it, because it's not for you, right? It's not for you. It is, but it's for everybody else too.
Yeah. And Kacy, I'm just so glad that you mentioned, the whole feedback element, because not because you've designed everything based on data and based on input and stuff like that. That means that the final design will be the finished article. You might have to tweak certain things, right?
Yeah.
And if you're married to version 1, you're done, right? Because you're going to be close to feedback and close to constructive criticism about how to improve the intervention you've just deployed. So I'm really happy that you've mentioned that, because people need to be open to that criticism. Okay,
100%.
the moment they close themselves to that, they're done, right? And something that you mentioned as well, which is better be good, and it better be accessible as well, and create the least amount of friction between the intervention and the person as well. And something that I've in our experience as well, we've seen that for people to engage with a specific intervention, they need to be exposed to that intervention, or to the marketing or advertising of that intervention via several different touch points. So
Right.
the manager mentions it, it's mentioned in a town hall, they see it on the intranet, they get an email about it, word of mouth, it's like, and we've kind of measured that, and it's like once they are exposed to like 7 different channels and about this particular intervention, then the rate of participation actually increases as well. But as you were saying, it better be good, because if not, the word gets around and then you're done with that. All right, Kacy, so as we are approaching the end of the episode, I do want to ask you a question about, it's more of a question is, what would you say to those business leaders that are on the fence between, yeah, I'm just going to keep doing sporadic activities. They seem to do the job. It's like, there was this particular leader that was so funny. He said that his employees actually enjoyed a high degree of well-being because he had 3 Labradors roaming around the site. And that made people, uplifted people's moods, and they made them happy. So, I mean, that's ridiculous. Those are the outliers, right? So again, just going back on a serious note, what would you say to those people that they think that, what they're doing is fine because they do a bunch of stuff, mental health first aiders and fairs and mindfulness week and so forth. And what would you say to them to persuade them to take that leap into taking a more strategic and comprehensive and systematic approach? And that means basically achieving national standards or international standards of workplace well-being, right? So what would you say to them to convince them to take that step and take a more committed approach to improving employee well-being in their businesses?
Yeah. I mean, look, I think work is just going to keep getting more complex as we progress, right? We've got all sorts of distributed work, which is incredible because many of us, all knowledge workers, do distributed work, which is on the computers, right? It's on your phones. It's everywhere you are. You've got businesses doing hybrid work. You've got businesses doing cluster hybrid work. You've got businesses making everybody come in 5 days, a week. And companies are becoming more and more like sororities and fraternities, right? That's a very maybe US concept, but that's really what it feels like when you're joining a company at this place, because the table stakes are so high around where people work, how people work, what kind of culture the company has. People are asking those questions now, right? And I love Gen Z and millennial colleagues because they will ask those questions that me as a Gen Xer, I wasn't brave enough to ask early in my career, right? I didn't even think I had a choice in the culture that I worked in. I worked a very specific way because it was the only way I knew how to work. It's not that way anymore. And the internet and social media are everywhere, and people are not scared, and they will use them, right? And so what I would tell companies is when you're building these programs of well-being, the better you build them, the better your culture is, the better that you look at how and the kind of autonomy you're giving to your people, the better people you're going to get, because people have a choice. And people are now saying they will give up income and a lot of it to have better culture, more autonomy, higher well-being. And that's not just those younger generations, that's across the board. People are done, right? And yes, there are always going to be people that love to go to the bar after work and be with their colleagues from 5 in the morning until 10 p.m. But that's not most of us, right? And so really learning and deeply investing in the space of well-being and making sure that it is not boilerplate, check the box, siloed well-being is going to change the candidate pool that you get. It's going to change your retention, and it is going to make it so that you have your pick of the best workers out there. And in this very competitive, highly technical environment where innovation is happening every 2 seconds, no business can afford to not have the best. You can. So that is my 3-minute advertisement for why we want the best well-being possible, and we don't just want to have this be, something we say but don't dig into, right? We've got to fix cultures. We've got to fix work. It has changed more in the last 3 years than it did in the prior 90, right? And we as leaders, we as individuals in the workplace have to recognize that, and have to recognize the stress and the fractured nature of the way that people work and how people feel when they work, how distracted they are. And we have to provide scaffolding for them and be in this together to do our best work possible together. And I think my friend just popped his head up in the background over here. I'm terrible with directions on these things. So if you see a little dog head, Otto has entered the building for the podcast.
I am so glad that I have invited you to the to this episode, and Otto as well. Super happy because I'm sold. I mean, thank you for articulating it in such a clear, crisp, direct, manner, basically, because leaders need to understand that this is not a nice to have. This is absolutely a strategic move. Particularly around the talent side of things. As you were saying, great talent, have choices available to them. And the lesser talent might not, but the greater talent they actually do, right? And so, my dear Kacy, before we leave, I'm going to put you on the spot. Can you think of one or two people that you consider heroes of yours, past or present?
Yeah. I mean, I'm such a total nerd. So I'm going to embarrass myself, my partner, and everybody I know with these. But I have a business hero, and I have 2 joint organizational psychology heroes. And this is not a plug of any kind for anything, but Arianna Huffington has been my hero since the early 80s, when she was a beautiful, perfect fashion maven, publishing, brilliant, everything. And then to see her not grow 1 but 2 businesses in these spaces, and fill holes that so desperately needed to be filled, and do it with such unbelievable strength, kindness, compassion for humans. I can't say enough things. I think the second 2, I'm going to really embarrass myself, Brene Brown and Adam Grant, actually inspired me to go to school for organizational psychology. And when I read Dare to Lead, and I knew there was a different way to do everything than the way that we'd always done it, and that vulnerability was really the key to unlocking the best in people and making people feel safe. And I started to read Think Again and a lot of Adam's books. I knew I had to go to school for this. Like, I knew that there was something about the work that they did that I was naturally inclined and already doing, but not with any kind of language around it to talk about it or really educate others. And so those are my heroes, and I'm a total nerd.
Thank you for sharing. Actually, it's great to know that. I mean, I've known you for a while, and it's great to know you even better now, Kacy. Last thing, please complete the following sentence. The world would be a better place if
everyone was kind. I'm going to add one caveat to that. I think the most important thing that any human being can do, and there's like some kind of cicadas in the background, so I apologize. I can't stop cicadas as I'm going to say this. Otto's freaking out because the cicadas are all over in my yard somewhere. You never know what any human is going through on any day. You never know. And I know this from having gone through a miscarriage and being in the office right after that happened, and traveling and being everywhere, and no one knew, right? You never know. And so when you don't choose to be kind, when you don't take the extra second to think about that person, and you just go with where you are, you could push someone over the edge. and you had no intention to do it and you didn't mean to, I'm not asking people to be perfect, right? Because nobody's perfect. Nobody's nice all the time. Nobody says everything right. This doesn't mean don't be direct. Be direct, but be kind. Because if you're not, it could be the thing that pushes another human over the edge.
Well said, my dear Kacy. Well said. And again, like I said, I'm so happy that I invited you. It's been wonderful to learn from you, to get to know you a bit more as well, and to just confirm, what I always thought, that you've got a brilliant mind and you've got so much to offer. And thank you for improving the life and work experience of people around the world through the work that you do, Kacy. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It's my honor.
Yeah. All right, my friends. So before you leave, make sure that if you like this video, please click on the like button. And again, if you want to be the first to benefit from the wisdom, knowledge, and experience of our distinguished guests, please make sure to click on the subscribe button. Other than that, thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode. Take care. Bye.